this evening, there was also a very heavy reliance on security legislation and tough armed tactics. And sixthly, a reliance on constitutional manipulation in an attempt to prop up the regime. The 1983 Tricameral Constitution, which was approved by the South African electorate with a yes vote of some 66%, is comparable to Mr. Smith's 1969 Parity Constitution, which was approved in a referendum there by the white electorate with a yes vote of nearly 75%. We in the PFP warned that the Tricameral Constitution would face the same grave danger which was faced by Mr. Smith's Parity Constitution, namely that it would risk triggering a black rage which would not be able to be controlled. And I wonder if this government imagined the extent of the black resistance which has been set in motion by their new constitution. My overall impression of the South African situation at this time is that the sweeping display of force in terms of the state of emergency which has been declared, the widespread detentions, have in fact served only to stiffen resistance and inflame hostility. The government seems to be sliding deeper and deeper into a jackboot type of mentality and approach. When will the message penetrate that one cannot enforce acceptance of apartheid by the use of the bludgeon? The long-term effect of repressive action will be merely to deepen the hatred of the system and to spawn a fresh wave of clandestine activities which could rebound later in even fiercer violence. The only emergency here in this country, ladies and gentlemen, is apartheid itself. We don't need a bigger and a bigger stick against the likes of school children. What we need is discussion and negotiation. The only durable solution to the crisis in South Africa will be the solution which all South Africans find together. The Smith government in Rhodesia also the extent of the rage and resistance which they have set in motion with their new constitution and their recent actions. The situation has now reached the point where the government has lost control of a number of township areas, and they haven't regained that control. That control which they have hardly extends beyond the short shooting range of a petroleum castor, in my opinion, as it moves through the townships. And as it moves out of the townships, that control moves with it. The same thing happened to the Smith government in Rhodesia, although in their case they lost the tribal areas. The punishment of the necklace, which is meted out in today's South Africa as a punishment for collaborators, is reminiscent of similar treatment meted out by the forces of the Patriotic Front in their efforts to gain control over their tribal areas. The point of all this, ladies and gentlemen, is that the public is fully aware of how that saga ended. They went through a bloody and awful civil war. And are we going to go that same route? Can the government not see that the Smith government walked that road of diminishing options in a democratic way of life under the rule of law is precisely to begin implementing a democratic non-racial way of life under the rule of law. And to do it now for South Africa's majority who are presently denied their fundamental rights as equal citizens of this country. Can they not see that peace and security can only be found in equal justice and equal rights for all? It is urgent for South Africa to change direction.
General Obasanjo of Nigeria, Lord Barber, a close political associate of Margaret Thatcher, Dame Nita Barrow, Mr. John Melasela, Sardar Swaran Singh, and the Reverend Edward Scott. And their findings in response to the 5 steps were as follows, and I quote, "We have examined the government's program of reform and have been forced to conclude that at present there is no genuine intention on the part of the South African government to dismantle apartheid." Quote. Those were the findings of the eminent persons group, and yet they seem to come so close to establishing real dialogue in South Africa, and we really have to ask ourselves what went wrong. And I quote further from their report, "Our work in South Africa has been a moving personal experience. When we arrived, there was carnage in Alexandra. On the day of our final departure, Crossroads was on fire, and a pall of smoke hung in the air, in the sky. We saw a country in upheaval and witnessed great human suffering. As we write, the killings continue. It was clear that our task would be immensely difficult. Its success would," and further, quote, "is of an even sharper decline into violence and bloodshed with all its attendant human costs. A racial conflagration with frightening implications threatens. The uncoordinated violence of today could become a major armed conflict, spilling well beyond South Africa's borders. In such circumstances, the entire economic fabric of the country would indeed be destroyed." Unquote. South Africans must not regard the members of the eminent persons group as enemies of South Africa bent on our destruction. I met with these distinguished people on one of their visits to South Africa and was struck by their deep concern for the future of this country and their fear of what might develop, a fear reflected in their report. That is not to say that I necessarily agree with everything in that report, many, many pages long. But they were making a serious effort to promote peaceful negotiations, and it is important for us to know what their conclusions were.